As I mentioned previously, one of my bigger disillusions with the content as it relates to the channel is that I didn't feel as if there was sufficient information provided on my part as it pertains to these other countries that are not the United States. So, over the course of the last 24 hours, I have been trying to prepare for this stream. I've got notes for the first time ever. I've actually, at no point prior to this, in planning on doing a stream or a upload, done something to that effect. So I'm going to jump in. But just to clarify, this is to an extent a test as well. Hopefully, if this goes decently, or if I feel I've conveyed information that the audience has not heard of before, I can do more of these. So during 1978, we had the beginning of the Iranian Revolution, and that saw the overthrow of the. Let me read my notes. already starting off with a failure. Um, okay, so the Persian monarchy, which had been in power for over 2,000 years, and was supported by the United States, or rather, it's the person that was in power at that time, Mohammed Reza Shah. There's so many these names. He was overthrown in favor of the revolution's leader, Ruhollah Khomeini. I've actually spent about maybe 5 or 10 minutes alone trying to pronounce his name, so that's another error on my part. But he takes over, and he's in the time before taking over, part of this year-long series of demonstrations. And I need another light. Or rather, I can just put these right here and then kind of hold the paper up right here. So he takes over, and the revolution's this big surprise to the world because it lacks what are the customary causes of past revolutions, such as being defeated in a war, which causes people to strike out against their leadership. Hey, you screwed up. That's why we lost. Financial crisis, which the U.S. had 10 years ago, but that's neither here nor there. I'm surprised we didn't have a revolution. Peasant rebellion, or a disillusioned military. So none of this happened to lead to this event, which is why it stunned people. They were, supposedly having economic prosperity according to the rest of the world. But also it caught people off guard because, again, in 1 year, you go from having this system that's been in place for over 2,000 years to now getting what we have today, which is why that year of 1979 is so significant. Just throwing out centuries of the old and putting in something new. It was also very popular with the people that lived there. And anytime you have, and I guess that's what I always like about revolutions, in the sense that, but besides all the bloodiness, but when there is the input of the people in the country, that should come first ahead of what those who don't even live there have to say, in my opinion. Now, obviously, if they're preaching harm to other places, that's something else. But that also was why this was so successful. The numbers were in the favor of the people, and it's always going to be. Let's see here. Also, it was a surprise for removing a Western supported authoritarian monarchy with an anti-West authoritarian theocracy. So if you get rid of one thing, put in something else. And if it's backed by the West, it's supposed to be successful, and it wasn't. So that year saw the beginning of the Iranian hostage crisis, where Iran's students, or some students over there, they seized American military personnel. This was popular in Iran, with thousands gathering in support of the hostage takers, and is credited with strengthening Khomeini's pristine, as well as consolidating anti-American sentiment there. This is actually the first instance where you have Khomeini, who at this point has only been in power for a couple of months, start referring to the U.S. as Satan, and speaking in all of the anti-American rhetoric that they describe here. And this is actually the beginning of why American relations with Iran are so strained, and it's going to transition into the Iraq-Iran war, which is why the video is only for these 5 years, because I went into that thing thinking, okay, I'll just put down some details about the war, and there's so much important stuff that happens. It would be a disservice to not talk about it to a larger length than this. But this is important for what's coming up in the next 2 years. So the revolution left the previously strong Iranian military disbanded, and this is seen over the world and noticed by people that don't live in Iran. And one of those people is Saddam Hussein, who I'm sure most Americans that have been around for maybe 15, 20 years have some idea of who that is. So when he becomes aware of the Iranian military being, in this state of disarray, he says, um, and seeks to become the new strongman of the Middle East, and wants an expansion of Iraqis' access to the Persian Gulf through the acquisition of the territories previously claimed earlier from Iran prior to the revolution. So before the revolution, he said, "All right, I'm going to give them their thing. That's going to be that." And then he goes, "Wait, they've thrown away their past leader. Their military's been disbanded. It's my time to come in there and take what I'm looking for." So that's his diabolical plan. And on September 22nd, 1980, Iraq evades Iran. The Iraqi Air Force launching airstrikes on 10 Iranian airfields with the intent of terminating the Iranian Air Force, which failed. A week later, Iran launches Operation, was this Spock Sword? My handwriting during this is bad. But during the operation that they launched on September 30th, so this is only a couple of days later, they badly damage the Ozark nuclear reactor. And this is a big deal because this was almost done. So if Iraq had maybe waited 2-3 weeks later, they would have had their nuclear reactor to come and help them even more. But that's you get for being impatient, or for just going in there without having all your stuff ready. The same day, Iraq invades Iran. A conflict begins in the city of, here's another one I can't pronounce, Khorramshahr. I have it right here. Khorramshahr. Okay. Becoming known as the Battle of Khorramshahr. The conflict lasts 34 days and leaves 7,000 Iraqis and Iranians dead on both sides. You're going to notice that as we go, and that's the problem with any war. You have all these casualties. But in November, so this is 2 months later, Iran launches Operation Mervarad. This is an air and sea attack that destroys 80% of the army of Iraq, as well as the entirety of the Navy of Iraq. So 80% of Iraq's Navy is destroyed. Scratch that from the record, what I just said about the army. And it also goes after the entirety of its radar sites in the southern portion of the country. So in December, Hussein announces Iraq will go to defense, and both Iraq and Iran spend most of 1981 on defensive footing. So for most of that year, they're just kind of biding their time to where they can go back to attacking each other. And sure enough, in subsequent years of this conflict, you're going to get more. This happens and this happens and that happens. These people die. All right, early January of 1981. This is like the 5th, 6th, 7th, first couple of days of that month. During the Battle of Desful, Iraq lost 45 T-55 and T-62 tanks, and 141 Iranians died. In April, the Iranian Air Force launches a surprise attack on H-3 Air Base in western Iraq. This is considered the Iranian Air Force's most sophisticated operation during the war. Iran claims it destroyed 48 Iraqi ground aircrafts on the ground, so they weren't being used at that point. They were just in storage over there. So, September, Iran ends the Iraqi siege of country is that not country. Hey, if I make a mistake, I catch it fairly quickly, at least when it's not pronunciation. So they have a siege on Abadan with Operation Samkan ol Ayak. So they end that siege. They take their stuff back. That's the main thing to take away from that. Iran begins Operation Tariq al-Quds, launching an attack from Iraq's rear. Iran retakes Boston, not Boston, Massachusetts, but Boston with an A in Iran. And fall further complicates logistical issues for Iraq and forces its military to use Alvez, which is another part of Iran, to south route for resupplying troops. So they have to go and use this other route to resupply their troops. And then 60,000, or rather 6,000 Iranians and over 2,000 Iraqis die in the operation. So that's about 8,000 people that die in Iran successfully requiring this territory or this part of the nation. In March, Iran launches Operation Undeniable Victory. I love that name. Capturing an Iraqi headquarters. This succeeds in driving Iraqi forces away from Shus, Desful, and Alvez, in addition to the destruction of hundreds of Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles. So in April, the following month, Iran launches Operation Beit al-Maqdis, which succeeds in liberating Komodar. The same one as earlier. I have to go back and look at the paper. You write the pronunciation on one sheet and then you just keep moving it around. We're having some technical difficulties. Koramshur. All right, Koramshur. They go back over there. That's a pretty important area for the first 2 years of that. So it's my mistake for messing it up, but oh well. I gave my forewarning. So when they have this conflict going on, they're able to drive them. This is in March when they have Operation Undeniable Victory. It's a victory for Iran because they're able to get Iraq out of 3 cities, in addition to destroying hundreds of Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles. And then back to Iran to Operation Beit al-Maqdis, which is conducted in April of 81 and succeeds in liberating Khorramshahr and sending Iraqi troops to the border. 19,000 Iraqis surrender in Khorramshahr, and over 30,000 Iranians are killed. I think this gets more interesting in 82 when the other countries get involved. Kind of shows you the pettiness of some of the other places. The U.S. begins supporting Iraq more. So the U.S. at that point, this is we're at 82 now, realizes, they're getting destroyed. We need to make sure that this doesn't go all the way. And this is when Reagan's in office, and he says, let's see here. The U.S. cannot afford to let Iraq lose to Iran or lose this war to Iran. Which again, if you remember, Iraq invades Iran. None of this would be happening right now if Iraq had if Hussein had just said, you know what, I don't really need to be the new strongman. Let me just take care of my own people and not bother other places. But because he didn't, he gets this reprisal. So Reagan says that, and then he goes and helps them out, sending them economic aid and whatnot, Iraq. And the Soviet Union starts helping Iraq because it's pissed off that Iran got rid of its eradicated by purging the communist Terra Party, which was in Iran before its leadership was like, yeah, you get out of here. So Hussein announces a proposal of a ceasefire in June, and 2 weeks withdrawal from Iranian territory. So that means they're going to stop firing on each other, and within 14 days, all of Iraq's troops are going to leave Iran. And Khomeini's response is to say, if we're going to stop this war, we need 2 things: we need the new Iraqi government. So that means you have to step down, referring to Hussein, and repair the places you've destroyed or damaged or whatnot. and you can guess how this goes. Also, one thing I found, and I put this in here. I took note of it because it shows you the kind of character that Hussein had. So when he is meeting with his cabinet members, his health secretary, whose name I have a hard time pronouncing, it's Raya Ibrahim Hussein, says, "You know what? We can probably get Iran to do this agreement with us, or rather, stop the conflict, if you step down temporarily while we negotiate, and then you come back into power afterward." And Saddam rather, is so, I guess, flabbergasted by this. He asks all of his other cabinet members, "You agree with this proposal?" No one raises their hand. So then he takes Ria outside, Rida, the health secretary, the same one that proposes this. They go outside, and he shoots him with his pistol. Then comes right back to the meeting. And that's who the U.S., the great lovers of democracy and human rights and blah 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 blah, decided to back at that point. Just astonishing. So in July, Iran launches Operation Ramadan, which involved over 180,000 troops on both sides and was one of the largest land battles since World War II. So the scale of this thing is enormous. The Iraqis used tear gas, which is the first use of chemical warfare during the war. And Iraq is successful in defeating Iranian breakthroughs. But there's a casualty toll that includes 80,000 soldiers and civilians. Now, in November, later that year, Iran launches Operation Muharram, succeeding in taking back 550 kilometers of Iranian land. So they get their land back, a bunch of it, capturing over 2,000 Iraqis and either injuring or murdering 6,000 Iraqis. So going into 1983, after their first full year of having war, because remember, for 81 they spend 8 months just with nothing, no conflict whatsoever. Iran develops the view, well, if we're going to win this war, we're going to go and have a conflict that's around the entire breakthrough of the front. So if we go and fight in this particular area, we'll be able to win. Which, again, I'm recounting this to you, knowing that there's still another 6 years of this left. So you can kind of guess how well that went for them. Let's see here. Iran launches Operation Far al-Nazir, an attack along the stretch near al-Amara, and Iraq is part of an effort. So that al-Amara, to clarify, is part of Iraq, and this is part of an effort to reach highways connecting North and South Iraq. Maybe they're going to occupy it. Maybe they're going to do something else. But that's their plan. So Iran suffers large casualties and reduces its use of human waves afterwards. So that's what they take away from that particular conflict. That's why it's significant. It basically says to them, what we've been doing in that one particular field isn't working. So throughout 1983, there are multiple dawn operations. I think about 10 of them. Not in that year, but there's at least 10, I believe, but just loads of them. Notably, Operation Dawn 3, where Iraq launched airstrikes along with attack helicopters with chemical warheads. And this was, showing Saddam's increased interest in chemical weapons. 17,000 people died on both sides from this part of the war. In Operation Dawn 4, Iran captures Penjwin and other villages. So it's a victory for them. Let's see here. So going into 84, the Iraq army is equal to the size of the Iran army, thanks to an expansion of the military draft of Iraq. And they declare total war, which means they have small children who start fighting as soldiers. There's actually a picture of one of them that I saw earlier. Just wow. When you see stuff like that, you can tell that the people who are in leadership And I'm not here to defend Iran as the greatest place ever, but I think none of these countries are above criticism. But when you see images of these small children who are now going to war to fight against a country that theirs chose to invade, it'd be different if it's Iran says we're going to end Iraq and starts being the aggressor. But in this instance, they weren't. So in Iraq saying, hey, we're getting screwed here. We just launched, we're in over our head. Let's go and take kids out of second what do you call it, preschool, and put them in some rags and get them to fight. And that's who the US supported. Oh man, it's America. So Iraq launches the first of the 5 War of the Cities. This is a thing of just every year they launch one of these for the remainder of the war, with bombardments lasting for most of February of 1984. And in that same month, the Revolutionary Guard starts Operation Kite Bar, which is where 40,000 Iranian casualties resulting from the Battle of the Marshes, and inflicting 10,000 casualties on Iraq. Their names are so similar: Iran, Iraq. That's why it's called the Iran-Iraq War. By the end of the year, you've had 170,000, so 170000 combat fatalities inflicted on Iraq, or rather Iran. There I go again, messing their names up. And then Iraq has 80,000. Now that's significant because you would think if someone's invading a country and they're going to have their forces go into this other place where it's the whole population, they're going to get screwed unless they have superior weaponry. But there are 2 things that cause, by the end of 1984, Iran to have double the number of casualties of Iraq. One is Iraq getting support from the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Whatever your opinions are on those 2 countries, and I've got plenty to complain about with them, they give them, their weaponry, and whenever you have more nations working together against one, you're in for a problem. So Iran really did screw itself up a few years before this started with the hostage crisis, because it's very likely that if that didn't happen, the U.S. wouldn't have just jumped in this. It was obviously butthurt over the hostage crisis. But also Iran, as you heard through there, they have several times where they go into Iraq and try to, become further aggressors. And so they start playing on their turf, where they have the superior weaponry as a result of getting support from these other countries. And you see how that went for them, double the casualties. So there are 2 people in here. I want to make sure, that they liked what was said here if they want to see more of it. I definitely want to do at least the end of this war. I thought this was going to be longer than it actually was, but I went through the notes pretty satisfiably. So if either of you has anything to say it now, or I'll end the stream. But I find this stuff really interesting. I didn't know about a lot of it until today. And I think when people make an effort to learn about history in other countries, places that they're not personally affected by, it can really influence what those people of the future that are going to be in positions of leadership might do themselves. They might not want to repeat the same mistakes of the people that have come before them. You've actually had foreign experts who said both Iraq and Iran had military failures that prevented them from winning that war. So that's another thing where an analysis from people who aren't there, looking at what was done, they look at the full record and say, hey, you could have done this better. That should have been done that way. There's something to take away from that. So if either of you can leave a comment, I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, I'll cut the stream off. But let me know. I hope you guys have accounts. I want to make sure I'm not just talking to myself. No one's going to leave a comment. We're just going to stare at me. But yeah, I'll do the rest of the war next week. And I also have an ambition to do the period because the U.S. invaded, or rather, it had the CIA install a dictatorship instead of the democratically elected Mohammad Mossadegh um, in '53. So I would rather have more on the Iranian Revolution in another stream about that period of 20 years, just that whole period in one. That would be more interesting to me because it shows you what kind of the sort of the cause, I guess, just from what I remember, and then going into the problems that come afterward that lead to this enormous shift and change after 2000 over 2,000 years of that particular form of government just thrown out the window within a year. So the period of the 70s and the 80s are very significant. I'd argue that that particular event is more significant than anything Iran's had since then, but it still is followed by things that are also of value. So does anyone have anything else to say? Yes, no, maybe so. All right, one person left. So thank you for watching. I'll do this again next week. And again, we're come here to learn something. I think I've learned something from writing this stuff down. I seek to learn more. So thank you. The winds of change are with us now.